Hey everyone. So, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you will know that I posted a series of my deconversion a while back, and I just wanted to re-upload those as a single video here so it's a little easier to watch and it's not all broken up. It will be about 25 minutes long, so if you're in for it, you're in for it. If you're not, you're not. I can't blame anyone for not wanting to watch a 25-minute video. So, without further ado, here is my story. So, like most people are, I was born into the church. It was a small Southern Baptist church in rural Indiana. I was dedicated to the Lord at probably a week old, and I still have my dedication letter somewhere in my house. I grew up in that church. I loved that church, and a lot of my earliest memories are of that church. I can remember sitting up on the pulpit and listening to the pastor just preach his little children's sermons and staring at the stained glass windows and thinking this must be what heaven is like. But I mean, honestly, I was never really given a choice but to believe. I was never given the tools to question the religion. I was just expected to believe it. Honestly, I was thoroughly indoctrinated into the religion. So, at around 5 or 6, I accepted Jesus into my heart. I remember that wasn't that big of a deal to me because I had always had Jesus in my heart, but it was just something that everyone did, and it wasn't really that big a deal to me. So, somewhere around that time, around the time I was 6 or 7, my home life started to fall apart. My dad, his probable drug use and definite alcohol abuse started to spiral out of control, and it led to a really crappy home life and some very traumatic incidents in my childhood. But eventually he was arrested and taken to court-ordered AA, and that's where he became a hot for Jesus Christian. He had always been religious, but in going to AA, he really rediscovered Jesus. Everything he did had some sort of religious undertone. Every reason he gave for being a good person or a good father, which he wasn't, was for Jesus. And we became very involved in the church. I mean, my mom worked at the church. My dad and my grandparents sang in the praise band and played guitar, and we were in the church every chance it was open. I mean, we were in church even when it wasn't open, because my mom was the secretary. So she would take us to the church, and me and my little brother would play in the church and just have a good time. And I remember sitting in the basement reading Stephen King books or watching The Rundown with The Rock and Sean William Scott on repeat. It was a sanctuary from a crappy home life. But at around 10, I was baptized, and it was a full immersion ceremony. I was a Baptist, so we got up in front of the congregation, said our little spiels, and the pastor dunked me, and I came out of the water feeling like I was washed in the blood of the Lamb. Like, finally, now I get to go to heaven. Now I get to go spend eternity with my loved ones in heaven. So from then on, I took my Bible to school. I tried proselytizing to my peers. I donated my allowance at the VBSs. And I even went to and helped set up those VBSs. And like I already said, my mom worked for the church, and my dad and grandparents sang in the praise band. So church was really my refuge until around the time I turned 13, when my parents divorced. It was a very bitter and ugly divorce with a lot of resentment between the two of them. And honestly, I began resenting God. Like, I was asking myself and asking God why, if I had been and done everything he expected of me, why was he cursing me with destroying my family? So eventually I continued to go to the Southern Baptist Church, but I started frequenting a couple other churches, non-denominational churches, with a couple of my friends. And Not to say that the Southern Baptist Church wasn't about love and peace and kindness, but the non-denominational churches, at least one of them, was more about love and peace and kindness and inclusion, and everything had some sort of tie back to those ideas. And at the other one was the place that I heard my first openly anti-homosexuality sermon. So it was like a balance between moderate and conservative Christianity that I was getting fed to me. So being raised in a very fundamentalist, conservative Southern Baptist church where everything was literal, like we believed in a literal interpretation of Genesis and stuff like that, it was jarring to be introduced to a moderate form of Christianity where everything's interpretation and it's not as set in stone. But I remember around that time, I was also introduced to atheism as an idea. And I wasn't pleased. I was your average Christian when it came to the idea of atheism. And my first introduction came with the comedian George Carlin. So me and my best friend Billy would go to his house just about every weekend. And he was the one I went to the more conservative non-denominational church with, but he was never all that religious. His parents were, but he wasn't. And we would sit and surf the internet for hours and hours at a time. And eventually we stumbled upon George Carlin's bits. And we would sit there and laugh at his airline bit for hours, just laughing our asses off. But eventually we came to his bits on religion. And neither of us found them all that funny because we were both raised very religious, even though he wasn't and I was. But I remember thinking, like, it's so sad that someone so funny is burning in hell for all of eternity just because he didn't believe in God. And honestly, that was the first pebble in my shoe. It was the first thing to get me to think, like, maybe there's something off about this. He was the first person I had ever seen that ridiculed religion and talked about it in a negative light. Everyone up until that point in my life had said that religion was necessary to be a moral person. It was a good thing. It was a great thing. It was the best thing. And I had never had anyone challenge that until I watched George Carlin, and it really stuck with me. But something happened around that same time that was even more jarring than that kind of overshadowed the idea of atheism in my mind, and that was around the time I was 13, 14. Like most people do, I discovered my sexuality, and I discovered that I was bisexual. I remember sitting in the computer lab of my middle school and finding a torn up book that had a skinny dipping scene between two boys. And I remember sitting there thinking about them kissing, and it excited me in a way that I had never really felt before. And I knew that I was going to burn in hell for these thoughts. Like, knew it. Like, even though I had never acted on those urges, my pastor was big on the thought crime aspect of religion, of Christianity. Like, if you commit the sin of lust in your heart, you have, or something like that. I don't remember the exact quote, but like, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you have committed adultery. I was convinced that I was going to burn in hell. So I genuinely started resenting God for cursing me with these feelings. Like, I literally tried praying the gay away. Like, I did that, and it didn't work. And like Ann Gaylor said, nothing fails like prayer. So what I did was the worst thing you could possibly do. I tried burying those feelings. I tried to hide it from everyone, including myself. And I went on life as best I could with this growing pit of depression and despair in me that just would not go away. I did all of the good works that you're expected to do as a good Christian teenager. And I went on missions trips, and I helped set up VBSs. Like, the missions trips, you would pay $150 of your own money to go break your back for Jesus. We went to like Augusta, Georgia in the summertime and rebuilt houses for the less fortunate. And I did this for 6 years straight, from the time I was like 13 to the time I was like 18, 19 years old. I went on these missions trips and broke my back for Jesus. But with my sexuality kind of underpinning everything in my life, and my religion also underpinning everything in my life, I started to have this inner turmoil. And something happened during that time that really started to tip the scales in one direction. And that was taking biology class. I understood it very naturally, but thought it was all bullshit. I would sit there and think, oh, I came from Adam and Eve and 6,000 years of biblical incest, not some monkey. But then my teacher brought out all replica skulls of known human ancestors, and it shattered my belief in a literal interpretation of Genesis. Like, evolution is easy to deny from a textbook explanation of it, but when you're actually holding the skull of an Australopithecus afarensis, it's really hard to not notice how human-like it is, but distinctively not human. But this didn't destroy my faith. I just, like any rational person, molded my beliefs to the evidence. So not long after that, my mom got remarried to a guy, and he wasn't very religious. Like, I remember thinking, like, if he's not very religious, or not religious at all, why does he seem to be so cool? Why is he having such a good life? Why is he an awesome, decent guy? That's at least what I thought of him at the time. That turned out not to be true, but so I remember that was at his house where we were living at the time. That was the first time atheism occurred to me on its own as an idea, not like prompted by George Carlin videos or anything like that. If you've ever seen Julius Sweeney's Letting Go of God, which I hadn't at the time, like a small voice started in the back of my mind that grew louder and louder and louder until it was like a roaring voice in the forefront of my mind. And it was asking one question: what if there is no God? And it kept repeating and repeating and repeating, and until I started having the thought, like, what if I'm committing the unforgivable sin of blaspheming the Holy Spirit? So I shut that voice down. I was like, nope, there is a God. I believe everything I was taught. And that's pretty much where that voice stayed for another 6 or 7 years. And eventually, my family, we moved from a small town to a larger town, and I had lived in that small town my entire life. I went to kindergarten through 11th grade in that town, in that same school with the same kids. And eventually I stopped going to church, and I felt lukewarm or backslidden or whatever Christianese word you want to use. But after about a year, I graduated high school, and like any confused teenager, I joined the Marine Corps. And in reality, I didn't do it out of any patriotism or love for my country or anything like that. I really just wanted to get away from my family and my community. And, I went to, like all Marine Corps recruits, or half of Marine Corps recruits, I went to MCRD San Diego. And during boot camp, I sort of had a spiritual reawakening. And I started reading my Bible all the time, and I started, like, just the New Testament, really, because they gave out pocket-sized New Testament Bibles. Never really the Old Testament until later. But, with that resurgence of my faith came a resurgence of the self-loathing and self-hatred of having these unclean thoughts. And along with those unclean thoughts, I actually developed quite the crush on one of the guys in my platoon. And it caused me a lot more inner turmoil and self-hatred than I had ever really felt before. I remember laying in my rack at night after lights and just thinking to myself, like, fighting with myself over these thoughts and knowing that they were just never going to go away. But in going to the Marine Corps, I was essentially replacing one indoctrination with another. Like, if you actually go and read the drill instructor's creed, they say in the creed that they will produce a thoroughly indoctrinated Marine. And that's what they did. They indoctrinated me into Marine Corps culture. And that's what they do with everyone. And it became the central point of my life for 4 years. So after boot camp, I went to MCT and MOS school and kind of continued to fall away from my faith and not give it as much thought. I'd had my boot camp revival, but that didn't last long. I had all that inner turmoil, and I just kind of said, you know what, fuck all this. I'm not dealing with it anymore. I've got more important things to worry about. So eventually I got stationed on the East Coast boot camp for my permanent duty station, Parris Island, South Carolina. And that's where I really started to fall away from the faith. What caused that was the fact that I was finally free from anyone and everything telling me exactly what I had to do with my life, except for the Marine Corps telling me exactly what I had to do with my life. But they stayed out of your personal life as long as you weren't like doing anything illegal. So I started drinking and partying. I never went to church, and I just gave less thought to my religion. It honestly just slipped my mind. That was until about a year or two into my enlistment, I got married. And my wife, who was my high school sweetheart, she already had a son from before we got together. Yeah, she got pregnant in high school. It's a cliche, but I'm glad she did because I love my son dearly. He is the light of my life. But when I finally had a son, I wanted to start picking the faith back up so I could teach my son exactly what I wanted to teach him. What I wanted to know, what I should teach my son, and what was the right way to raise him up. And so I started researching my religion. And I did the worst thing you can possibly do as a Christian. I picked up my Bible, opened to the first page of Genesis, and started reading with the thought of actually trying to understand what it said. And I made it through the first 5 or 6 books, and honestly, I was just thoroughly disgusted. I was like, what the fuck? What is this? I was never taught any of this. It's just genocide after genocide, and then a little aside about how they condone slavery and God committing genocide. And I was just blown away that I had never heard any of this before. And so I put the book down and I was like, okay, I'm going to start watching some YouTube videos, some debates and some lectures on Christianity and try to make some sense of this. And I mean, it didn't take me long to find my first Richard Dawkins video. It was something called like Richard Dawkins Explodes at Bullshit in the Bible. And it did not take me long before I started watching Christopher Hitchens debates and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett. And then I started reading books by these people, and I was just thinking, holy shit, these people are making so much more sense than anyone has ever made about religion in my entire life. So I was like, okay, maybe, just maybe these people are right. Maybe there's not a God. Maybe it's all made up bullshit. And after looking into it for thousands and thousands of hours, I came to the conclusion that I did not believe in God anymore, and that I was an agnostic atheist. And I mean, honestly, it wasn't easy for me to let go of my indoctrination. It was hard at first. I loved my religion. I lived my religion. I believed my religion to my core. And even though I had started to fall away from the faith, I still believed everything. It just destroyed my idea of what it meant to be Christian, and then destroyed my idea of God and all of this. And, I kept it mostly to myself in the beginning. But then I started to be more open about it, like asking people direct questions, and I got a lot of pushback, but not as much as you would expect in the Marine Corps. Like, I was, by the end of my 4 years, an open atheist. Like, I changed my designation from Baptist to atheist in the system. And, I never really got all that much pushback about it. I did get some from some ultra conservative religious people who joined the military out of some religious Christian nationalist patriotism. But other than that, like, most people were very fine with it. And eventually I got out of the Marine Corps and I moved back to the large city, Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's not very large, but in the grand scheme of things. But I moved back here, and I took like a 6 month hiatus from everything. I stopped working out like I did in the Marine Corps. I stopped everything and just devoted like 6 months to studying religion and Christianity. And like, I took a deep dive down the atheist rabbit hole. I was constantly reading, writing, or researching something to do with religion. I was watching Matt Dillahunty and the Atheist Experience, Dan Barker, Dark Matter 2525, Genetically Modified Skeptic, Cosmic Skeptic, Rationality Rules, Anthony Magnabosco videos. I was just watching it all constantly. And, it didn't go very well for me. I became very depressed. I had just left the only really available community that I had ever known. I lost all sense of identity and belonging and fell away from everyone and everything that I'd ever known. So I became very, very depressed and eventually had to be checked into a mental health facility for suicidal thoughts and ideations. And eventually I got on medications and left the facility, and decided that I wanted to major in history. I wanted to go to college, use my GI Bill, and major in history. And that's what I did for like 3 years, and I was very happy, and depressed occasionally when studying the Holocaust or stuff like that. Which, I mean, I didn't mention this, but I was, during high school, a big like World War II buff because my great grandfather had served, and I wanted to know what his experience was like. And, I'm not proud of it, not now, and not even then, but me and my best friend would make like Holocaust jokes and stuff. It's not a proud moment, but after I studied it, I was like, oh my God, what an asshole kid I was to make jokes about this. And that was another cause of depression, just studying the Holocaust and stuff like that. And then, I dropped out of college because I didn't know what I was going to do with a history degree. And on our fourth anniversary, I came out as bisexual to my wife, and she could not have been a more accepting, loving, kind, and caring person. Like, I remember where I was standing and exactly how I said it. Like, she walked in from getting off work on our fourth anniversary, and I grabbed her hands, and she could tell that something wasn't quite right. And, I just kind of blurted out, like, I'm attracted to guys. And she just looked at me, and she only had one real question after the whole conversation. And she was like, you are attracted to women, though, right? Or something like that. She's like, you're attracted to women, too, right? And I was like, yeah, of course, I'm bi, not gay. But, like, I could not have asked for a more accepting, loving, kind, caring, compassionate, awesome wife. And we're about to celebrate our 10 years this year, and I have never regretted marrying her for even a second. So eventually I ended up coming out on Facebook as both an atheist and bisexual, and honestly, I got more pushback from my family and friends about being an atheist than I did about being bisexual. Like, I knew that I would get pushback, but I thought it would be about my sexuality. I thought everyone would be disgusted and hateful, but they weren't. It was about being an atheist. I didn't believe their nonsense. That's what they were pissed about. So eventually I got depressed again, had another breakdown, went to the mental health facility again, got on new medications, got better, eventually got a job. And then I started just last year, I started a humanist group, or it's almost 2 years now. I started a local humanist group here in Fort Wayne called the Humanist Fellowship Assembly. And we're a relatively small group. There's about 6 or 7 of us that meet on a weekly basis just to discuss a book that we're reading or just chat about religion or our weeks and just try and rebuild that community that we had all kind of lost, because we're all ex-Christians and we all lost a large chunk of our lives when we stopped being Christian. And we wanted that community back. So I wanted to give that back to the non-religious here in Fort Wayne. And if you've watched any of my videos all the way to the end, I'm sure you've seen my little advertisement for my book, Ranting and Raving, a compilation of essays on religion and atheism. I wrote that book specifically to raise money to make the HFA, the Humanist Fellowship Assembly, into a legitimate nonprofit organization. And that's pretty much where I am today. I could not be happier that I had left my religion now that I've been able to look back on my life and examine what I used to believe and what I believe now, and I'm so much happier now. I could not be happier with where I'm at now.